Arizona State Route 88, known locally as the Apache Trail, had long carried a reputation that went beyond traffic accidents and missing hikers. Long before asphalt cut through the rock, the Superstition Mountains were spoken of in warnings, not directions. Apache legends describe the range as a place where greedy men vanished in pursuit of cursed gold, where spirits guarded the land by confusing the minds of intruders. Locals said the mountain did not kill, it changed people. At 2:07 a.m. on October 31st, that reputation resurfaced. Thomas Hale, a long-haul truck driver with 23 years on the road, was navigating a narrow bend just east of Canyon Lake. The night was moonless. Wind slid down the cliffs in dry, rasping breaths, carrying dust across the highway in pale veils that caught briefly in his headlights before disappearing again. There were no buildings, no lights, no cell signal, only road, rock, and darkness. Then something moved. At first, Hale assumed it was debris, perhaps a fallen sign or an animal crossing late. But the shape did not dart or scatter. It walked, slowly, unsteadily. As his headlights fixed on the figure, his foot slammed the brake. The truck screeched to a halt. A woman stood in the road. She was barefoot. Her clothes were torn into shapeless strips, ground deep with dirt and grit. Her frame was alarmingly thin. Shoulders caved inward as if her body had forgotten how to hold itself upright. When she raised her hands, Hale felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert air. Her hands were destroyed, skin split open in multiple places, deep lacerations packed with sand and stone. Several fingernails were missing entirely, torn back to the root. These were not the injuries of a single accident. They were layered, repetitive, inflicted over time. Hale opened the cab door but could not bring himself to step down. "Ma'am?" he called. "Are you hurt?" The woman lifted her head. Her face was hollow, eyes sunken but sharply focused, as if awareness was the only thing left untouched. Her lips trembled before sound emerged, dry and faint. "Mary." Hale leaned forward, heart pounding. "What did you say?" She swallowed with effort, her throat visibly working. "Mary Wilson." Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the asphalt directly beneath the truck's headlights. Emergency services arrived 26 minutes later. At Mountain Vista Medical Center, the emergency staff recognized immediately that this was not a typical rescue. Nurses exchanged looks as they cut away the remains of her clothing. Physicians spoke in clipped, careful tones. The woman flinched violently whenever the lights dimmed or a shadow crossed. without interruption. He had learned long ago that truth often revealed itself not in what was said, but in what was too smooth. Search teams were dispatched to the Superstition Range within 48 hours. A cave matching Mary's description was located in Le Barge Canyon. Inside, investigators found a sleeping bag neatly rolled, expensive organic food packaging, bottled water arranged in rows. His was not a place of desperation. Receipts recovered nearby showed purchases made 2 days before the disappearance. The name on the receipt, Sandra Wilson. The investigation deepened. Forensic analysts compared dental records. Ari Wilson's file showed a titanium post in her lower molar from a prior root canal. Woman in the hospital had no such implant. Hen confronted with this discrepancy. The woman calling herself Mary did not deny it. Brr. He smiled. By the time deputies arrived at the Wilson family home in Paradise Valley, Sandra Wilson was waiting, calm, composed, almost relieved. Brr. Hen handcuffed. She offered no resistance. Ate her during interrogation. She would describe the past 3 weeks as the most complete I have ever felt. He had not wanted to be near Mary. Brr. He had wanted to be Mary. And the Superstition Mountains, silent and ancient, had given her the stage. Arizona had always belonged to Mary Wilson. From the outside, her life followed a trajectory that appeared deliberate, almost inevitable. A top-tier education, a disciplined routine, a technology startup that grew quietly but steadily, avoiding spectacle while accumulating respect. She was described by colleagues as controlled, by investors as reliable, by her parents as the one who made it. Sandra Wilson lived in the margins of that gravity. Younger by 19 months, she spent most of her life orbiting Mary's accomplishments, like a shadow that never quite aligned. Jobs were temporary. Relationships ended abruptly. Financial trouble followed her like a low-grade fever, never fatal but never gone. Where Mary planned years ahead, Sandra survived weeks at a time. To the outside world, they were sisters who had simply grown apart. Inside Sandra's mind, the separation felt more like theft. From childhood, Sandra learned to study Mary the way one studies a language they are not allowed to speak. The cadence of her voice when she explained something complicated. The way she listened, head slightly tilted, eyes steady, never interrupting. The precise slant of her handwriting, confident without being aggressive. Mary did not flaunt her success. That made it worse. In Sandra's private journals, later recovered by investigators, the language was consistent. Mary did not earn her life. She occupied it. She stood in a place that should have belonged to both of them, or, more accurately, to Sandra alone. By the time Sandra was 28, imitation had evolved into rehearsal. She began spending hours alone in her apartment bathroom, standing before the mirror with the door locked. At first, the exercises were subtle. She repeated Mary's name aloud, adjusting pitch and breath until the sound felt less foreign in her mouth. She recorded herself on her phone, played it back, deleted it, tried again. Too soft. Too sharp. Not enough restraint. Mary never rushed her words. She allowed silence to sit. Sandra practiced that too. She studied old voicemail messages, looping short clips until she could anticipate the pauses. She watched video interviews Mary had given about her company, muting the sound first, mimicking the posture, the stillness. Only later would she add the voice back in. Walking came next. Sandra realized early that people recognized others less by facial features than by movement. Mary walked with economy, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Sandra practiced pacing the length of her apartment hallway, correcting her shoulders, adjusting stride length by inches. When she stumbled, she corrected herself. When frustration rose, she swallowed it. Progress required discipline. Handwriting proved the most difficult. Mary's signature appeared on legal documents, investor contracts, and corporation forms. It was elegant and deceptively simple. Sandra bought the same brand of pen Mary used. She filled notebooks with attempts, copying the letters over and over, tracing scanned documents beneath thin sheets of paper until muscle memory replaced intention. By the end of that summer, she could sign Mary Wilson without thinking. The idea of the hike emerged not as impulse, but as conclusion. Sandra suggested the Superstition Mountains because she understood the psychology of disappearance. People vanished there with disturbing regularity. The terrain was hostile, the legends persistent. If something went wrong, the mountain itself would shoulder the blame. Mary hesitated at first. Work obligations, investor calls. But Sandra framed the trip carefully. A reset, a chance to reconnect. No expectations. Mary agreed. On October 14th, surveillance footage captured their white Jeep Compass pulling into the Lost Dutchman State Park parking lot shortly after dawn. A retired couple later reported seeing the sisters argue quietly near the trailhead. Nothing loud, nothing physical, just tension, compressed and controlled. The mountain absorbed them easily. What happened next would never be fully reconstructed. No witnesses, no recording, no body. But evidence suggested Mary never left the mountain alive. In the days that followed, Sandra transformed preparation into performance. The cave she selected was not hidden by accident. It was accessible enough to allow resupply, remote enough to discourage casual discovery. She stocked it carefully. Organic food, bottled water, a sleeping bag rated for cold nights. Everything chosen to suggest survival without appearing comfortable. Pain, however, could not be staged cheaply. Sandra understood that credibility required suffering, real suffering, the kind that left marks beyond doubt. She began with abrasion, pressing her palms against stone until skin split, waiting for swelling to subside before repeating the process. Each session was controlled, measured. She documented the progression mentally, ensuring the damage appeared chaotic without being disabling. When skin toughened into callus, she tore it open again. Fingernails were next. Using a flat rock, she levered beneath the nail beds, stopping only when pain threatened loss of consciousness. Blood soaked into sand, dried, was scrubbed away, then reapplied with fresh injury. She did not scream. Sound wasted energy. In her mind, this was not self-harm, it was shedding. Each wound removed a piece of Sandra that no longer served a purpose. What remained was closer to Mary, cleaner, quieter, more believable. At night, she rehearsed the story she would tell. A man in mirrored sunglasses, a coin toss, a scream swallowed by the canyon. She refined details until they felt inevitable. The lies nested within truth. Superstition Mountains, real caves, real fear. She timed her emergence carefully. 3 weeks was long enough to convince, short enough to survive. When she stepped onto Route 88, she did not feel relief. She felt completion. At Mountain Vista Medical Center, staff noted her composure between episodes of panic. She cried at appropriate moments. She trembled when expected. Her fear aligned neatly with her narrative. Only Detective Carter sensed the dissonance. He noticed the absence of confusion common in trauma victims. Her memories were sequential, clean, painful, but not fragmented. She spoke as someone recounting something learned, not relived. Forensic evidence deepened the unease. Receipts, dental records, fingerprints beneath duct tape used in the cave, Sandra's prints, pressed deliberately, not smeared. The final confrontation did not come with hysteria. When Carter explained the dental discrepancy, Sandra listened politely. When he placed the Walmart footage on the table, she leaned forward, interested. When he used her name, not Mary's, she did not correct him. Arrest footage showed Sandra smiling faintly as cuffs closed around her wrists. Later, alone in an interrogation room, she offered her only unsolicited statement. "I didn't want her things," she said calmly. "I wanted her place." In court, experts described Sandra's psychology using clinical language: identity disturbance, obsessive fixation, pathological envy. None of it fully captured the intent. Sandra had not wanted to destroy Mary. She wanted to consume her. In her prison cell, months later, guards reported hearing conversations when no one else was present. 2 voices, similar but distinct, one calm, one sharp. Sandra was often found standing before the small steel mirror, practicing expressions, adjusting posture, perfecting a smile. 3 days after the woman identifying herself as Mary Wilson was stabilized, Detective Lance Carter began the first formal interview. It took place in a small, windowless room on the 3rd floor of Mountain Vista Medical Center. The walls were beige, chosen for neutrality. A recorder sat centered on the table, its red light steady and indifferent. Carter did not rush. He never did. He allowed silence to settle first, long enough for most people to feel compelled to fill it. Sandra, still introduced as Mary, sat upright, hands wrapped carefully in gauze, resting in her lap. Her posture was attentive, cooperative. She looked like someone who wanted to be understood. She began her story without prompting. She said the man appeared just after sunrise on the trail, tall, covered from the neck down, reflective sunglasses that hid his eyes. He spoke little. When he did, his voice was calm, almost bored. She described how he forced them off the trail, deeper into the rock, toward a narrow canyon where sound disappeared. Carter listened. She said the man flipped a coin. Heads, Mary dies. Tails, Sandra. It landed heads. Sandra's voice broke at exactly the right moment when she described, hearing her sister scream as she fell. She paused, wiped her eyes, then continued. She said she was chained in a cave afterward. That the man returned occasionally with food. That she tried to escape repeatedly. That her hands were destroyed clawing at stone. Carter nodded, occasionally asking for clarification. Locations, distances, time. Sandra answered smoothly. Too smoothly. Her narrative unfolded in clean sequence. No loops, no missing hours, no confusion about order. Trauma victims often spoke in fragments, jumping between moments, trapped in sensory recall. Sandra spoke like someone reciting a timeline. Still, the details were vivid enough to convince. Within a week, the story reached local media. Headlines described a miracle survivor, a woman who had endured unspeakable cruelty in the Superstition Mountains and lived to tell it. Cable news anchors spoke solemnly about the dangers of solo hiking. Commentators invoked the old legends again. The cursed gold, the angry spirits, the mountain that never gave back what it took. Sandra watched the coverage from her hospital bed. Visitors noted her composure. She thanked nurses by name. She asked doctors intelligent questions about recovery timelines. She cried during interviews, but never too long, never too hard, always within expectation. A fundraiser appeared online before the second week ended. It was organized by distant relatives and friends of the family, framed as support for Mary's recovery and in memory of Sandra. Donations poured in. By the end of the month, the fund exceeded $500,000. Sandra expressed gratitude publicly. Privately, she asked when she would be discharged. Meanwhile, Carter and the search teams moved into the mountains. The cave Sandra described was located in LaBarge Canyon after 2 days of grid searching. At first glance, it appeared convincing. Narrow entrance, low ceiling, hard stone floor, a place where someone could disappear. But inside, the illusion faltered. His sleeping bag was clean, too clean. No dirt ground into the fabric. Food packaging was stacked neatly against one wall. High-end organic brands not commonly associated with desperation. Bottled water, unopened, arranged by size. There were no chains embedded in the rock. No abrasion marks where metal would have scraped stone repeatedly. The cave felt lived in but not imprisoned. Forensic teams collected everything. Among the items was a Walmart receipt, folded carefully and placed inside an empty food container. The date was October 12th, 2 days before the hike. The name printed on the receipt was clear: Sandra Wilson. Carter reviewed the evidence in silence. He replayed the interview audio again that night, focusing not on what Sandra said but on what she never said. She never asked if her sister's body had been found, never asked where investigators were searching, never asked how long she had been missing. Grief, Carter knew, was rarely that tidy. Public belief hardened quickly. People wanted a monster. They wanted a masked man, a nameless predator hiding in the rocks. The idea that the mountain itself could still produce evil felt familiar, comforting even. It preserved order. Danger stayed external. Sandra's story fit, but small fractures widened under scrutiny. Medical staff noted how quickly her hand wounds began to heal. Severe abrasions typically became infected in wilderness conditions. Sandra's wounds were painful but clean, as if treated repeatedly. Controlled, when Carter requested dental records, the results arrived quietly. Mary Wilson's lower molar showed a titanium post from a root canal performed 3 years earlier. X-rays of the survivor's jaw showed no such implant. Her teeth were intact, healthy. When confronted gently with this inconsistency, Sandra did not react with confusion or panic. She listened. Then she smiled. By the time Carter requested her phone records, the case had already turned. GPS data showed Sandra's phone pinging near the mountain days before the hike. Surveillance footage from Walmart confirmed the purchase of rope, duct tape, bottled water, and camouflage clothing. The final piece came from fingerprints, under layers of tape recovered from the cave floor. Tape Sandra claimed had bound her wrists. Technicians found clear prints, not smeared. Pressed deliberately. They belonged to Sandra Wilson. The arrest took place at the Wilson family home in Paradise Valley. Sandra answered the door herself. She appeared calm, alert, almost expectant. During interrogation, after her rights were read, she offered no denial, no tears, no anger. She leaned back in her chair and spoke evenly. She never knew how lucky she was, Sandra said. I just finished what the mountain started. When asked if she regretted killing her sister, Sandra shook her head. I didn't kill her, she said. I replaced her. In the weeks that followed, the public struggled to recalibrate. Comment sections filled with disbelief. Talk shows debated nature versus nurture. Some blamed mental illness. Others blamed the mountain. A few questioned how many times Sandra had been seen without truly being seen. The fundraiser was frozen. The donations rerouted. Mary Wilson was buried without a body. Sandra Wilson was transferred to county jail to await trial. At night, guards reported hearing voices from her cell. 2 tones, one softer, one sharp, often arguing, sometimes laughing. Sandra spent long periods standing before the mirror bolted to the wall, practicing. The case should have felt finished. The evidence was clean. The narrative, once reversed, made sense. A jealous sister, a planned disappearance, a staged survival. In most investigations, that would have been enough. Charges filed, trial scheduled, public attention redirected to the next horror. But Detective Lance Carter could not shake the feeling that something essential was still unresolved. It began with timing. Sandra Wilson had not simply survived. She had returned at the precise moment when her story would carry maximum impact. Not too soon to invite skepticism. Not too late to risk death. 3 weeks, long enough to suggest endurance, short enough to preserve control. Carter reviewed the hospital footage again. He slowed the playback, watched her interactions frame by frame. Sandra responded to pain appropriately, but never reflexively. She anticipated questions before they were asked. Her fear arrived on cue, then receded. Trauma, Carter knew, rarely behaved on schedule. In subsequent interviews, Sandra never asked follow-up questions, never sought details about the investigation unless prompted. When Carter mentioned evidence contradicting her account, she listened with interest, not alarm, as if observing an experiment rather than defending her life. Psychological evaluators would later call this detachment. Carter called it authorship. He returned to the cave a second time, alone. Without the press, without technicians, without the weight of first impressions. Stripped of expectation, the space felt different. The cave was not a prison. It was organized. The sleeping area was positioned to avoid drafts. Supplies were stored above ground level to prevent moisture. The entrance allowed enough light to track time without revealing the interior from a distance. This was not where someone waited to die. This was where someone worked. Carter imagined Sandra inside the cave, rehearsing lines, adjusting expressions, practicing pain. He imagined her hands pressed against stone, not in panic but in calculation. He noted the absence of blood spray on the walls, the lack of desperate markings common in genuine captivity. He pictured her stepping back to assess the damage. Too clean. Do it again. Back in the evidence room, Carter reviewed items recovered from Sandra's apartment. Mirrors, recording devices, notebooks filled with handwriting drills, printed photographs of Mary taken from social media, marked with notes, posture, tone, clothing. Sandra had not wanted Mary's life. She had wanted Mary's presence. At the detention facility, guards began documenting irregular behavior. Sandra requested access to a mirror beyond what policy allowed. When denied, she improvised, using reflective surfaces, polished metal, glass, even the surface of water in her cup. She practiced facial expressions repeatedly, cycling through them until one settled. Staff reported hearing her speak aloud at night, sometimes softly, sometimes sharply. The voices were similar but not identical. One night, a guard paused outside her cell and listened. "You hesitate there," one voice said. "I didn't want it to sound forced," the other replied. In court filings, Carter described Sandra not as delusional, but as deliberate, not dissociated but divided. Her identity had not fractured accidentally. It had been replaced methodically. Mary Wilson, in this context, became less a victim of murder than a vessel. The public struggled with that interpretation. It was easier to believe in madness than intention. Easier to blame the mountain, the myths, the dark history of superstition. Easier to imagine a sudden break than a slow construction. During the preliminary hearing, Sandra remained composed. She corrected the pronunciation of her name when the clerk misspoke. She adjusted her posture when cameras shifted angle. She smiled faintly when reporters gasped. Carter watched from the gallery. He realized then that Sandra was not finished performing. The trial would give her what she wanted most: witnesses. Expert testimony outlined her psychological profile: obsessive fixation, identity appropriation, extreme self-harm framed as transformation. The analogies varied: parasite, mimic, shadow, but the conclusion remained consistent. Sandra did not want to destroy Mary. She wanted to erase the boundary between them. During a recess, Sandra caught her reflection in the courtroom glass. She tilted her head slightly, the way Mary used to when listening. Satisfied, she looked away. Carter returned to the mountain one last time before the trial began. He stood on Route 88, at dusk, watching the light fade from the rock. The Superstition Mountains loomed unchanged, silent, indifferent. They had not created Sandra. They had merely provided cover. The danger, Carter concluded, had never been the wilderness. It was the quiet certainty of someone who believed they deserved another person's life, and was willing to dismantle themselves piece by piece to claim it. When the verdict came months later, it would be decisive, but resolution would remain elusive, because somewhere between the cave and the courtroom, between imitation and embodiment, Sandra Wilson had crossed a line that could not be neatly labeled, and Carter knew, with an unease that lingered long after the case closed, that if she had not been stopped when she was, the next disappearance would not have looked like a crime at all. It would have looked like continuity. The final collapse did not arrive as a revelation. It arrived as accumulation. Frame by frame, receipt by receipt, the illusion unraveled not through drama, but through arithmetic. The Walmart footage was the first to be shown in full, recorded on October 12th, 2 days before the hike. The video followed Sandra Wilson through the outdoor aisle with clinical clarity. She moved without haste, scanning shelves, reading labels, comparing options. There was no visible distress, no hesitation. She selected rope with a breaking strength rated far beyond climbing needs, duct tape, bottled water in bulk, protein bars marketed for endurance athletes, a camouflage jacket sized for Mary's frame, not her own. At the register, Sandra paid in cash. She did not look at the camera. Investigators noted the absence of urgency. People preparing to flee often rushed. Sandra did not. She behaved like someone executing a checklist. Carter paused the footage repeatedly, isolating gestures. The way Sandra adjusted the jacket on her arm, testing the weight. The moment she glanced at her reflection in the freezer door and subtly corrected her posture. She was already rehearsing. The receipts corroborated the timeline. The GPS data placed Sandra near LaBarge Canyon multiple times in the days before the hike. She had visited the cave alone. She had prepared at Bar. His was not opportunistic violence. Bar. T was premeditated replacement. Bar. Psychiatric evaluations followed. R. Helen Moore, a forensic psychologist with experience in identity disorders, reviewed Sandra's journals, recordings, and digital footprint. Her conclusion avoided sensational language. Andra did not exhibit hallucinations. She was not detached from reality. She understood consequences. She understood morality. He rejected it. Bury. Andra's fixation on Mary did not stem from a desire for affection or approval. It stemmed from entitlement. She viewed Mary's life not as separate, but misallocated. B. She didn't want to become Mary, Moore testified. She believed she already was, just delayed. This distinction mattered. Sandra's self-harm, detailed extensively in medical reports, was not impulsive. Each injury followed a pattern: controlled depth, repeated abrasion, strategic damage designed to look chaotic while preserving function. She injured herself the way an artist modifies a medium. Forensic pathologists reconstructed the wounds in sequence. The earliest abrasions were shallow, exploratory. Later injuries were deeper, timed to reopen healing tissue. The removal of fingernails was staggered, not simultaneous, allowing pain to remain constant without becoming incapacitating. Sandra did not seek numbness. She sought continuity of suffering. In court, the dental evidence carried quiet finality. Mary Wilson's medical records were introduced. X-rays from 3 years prior displayed a titanium post embedded in the lower left molar. The implant was visible even to the untrained eye. The X-rays of the survivor showed nothing. Sandra watched the images without expression. When asked to explain the discrepancy, she did not argue. She did not claim error. She simply said, "I never needed one." The fingerprint analysis followed. Technicians explained how latent prints were recovered from beneath layers of tape found in the cave. Not smeared, not partial. Clear impressions placed deliberately, fingers pressed flat. Sandra's fingerprints. They were positioned where restraints would have been applied, suggesting control, not captivity. The implication settled heavily over the courtroom. Sandra had not been bound. She had staged the binding. The prosecution laid out the final sequence. Sandra led Mary into the Superstition Mountains under the guise of reconciliation. She chose terrain that limited witnesses and facilitated concealment. She killed Mary, likely quickly, likely without warning. The body was never recovered, but soil disturbances near the canyon suggested burial or removal into inaccessible terrain. Sandra then assumed Mary's identity, entering a controlled period of isolation designed to produce physical evidence consistent with survival and trauma. She inflicted wounds over time, rationed supplies, rehearsed her story, and emerged at a moment optimized for discovery. Every step was intentional. The defense attempted to frame Sandra as mentally ill beyond accountability. The argument failed. Mental illness, the court concluded, did not explain preparation, patience, and precision. During testimony, Sandra spoke only once. She requested permission to address the court. Her voice was steady. "I loved my sister," she said, "more than anyone ever did. I knew her better than anyone. I still do." She paused, as if expecting agreement. "I didn't steal her life," Sandra continued. "I corrected it." The courtroom remained silent. The verdict, when delivered, was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing followed weeks later. Life imprisonment without parole. Sandra did not react. As she was led from the room, she glanced once toward the gallery, scanning faces. Not for family, not for sympathy, but for recognition. In the aftermath, public debate lingered. Commentators argued whether Sandra was a monster or a mirror. Some questioned how many times people performed versions of themselves unnoticed. Others returned to the Superstition Mountains, insisting the land itself corrupted those who entered. Carter rejected both extremes. The mountain had not whispered instructions. Sandra had listened only to herself. Months later, at the correctional facility, guards continued to report unusual behavior. Sandra requested access to writing materials and mirrors. When denied, she adapted. She practiced in reflective surfaces. She spoke aloud in two tones, one calm, one critical. Therapists noted that Sandra did not mourn Mary. She referenced her frequently, but never in the past tense. Mary remained present, as standard, as benchmark. In one recorded session, Sandra was asked who she believed she was now. She answered without hesitation. "Me," she said. Finally, the Superstition Mountains remained unchanged. Tourists continued to hike. Legends persisted. The road claimed its share of accidents and disappearances. But Carter knew the truth of this case would never fully settle, because it was not about where the crime happened. It was about how easily a person could be studied, rehearsed, dismantled, and replaced, and how long it took for anyone to notice. The arrest did not feel like an ending. It felt administrative. Sandra Wilson was taken into custody on a quiet afternoon in Paradise Valley, the neighborhood unchanged by the gravity of what had unfolded, behind one of its manicured doors. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as police vehicles idled at the curb. There were no raised voices, no resistance. Sandra walked between deputies with measured steps, her posture straight, her expression neutral. She looked like someone leaving for an appointment. Inside the Wilson home, investigators cataloged what remained. Mary's belongings sat untouched in their usual places. Shoes aligned, books marked with notes, a laptop still logged into work accounts. Nothing had been disturbed. Nothing stolen. Sandra had not wanted Mary's things. She had wanted the continuation. Mary Wilson was buried weeks later without a body. The service was small, closed casket. A photograph on the altar showed Mary smiling in profile, unaware of how closely that image had been studied, copied, rehearsed. Her parents sat in the front row, hands folded, unmoving. They did not cry when the minister spoke. Tears had already been spent during the weeks of uncertainty, hope, and reversal. Their grief carried a second weight. They had embraced the person who killed their daughter. They had held her hands in a hospital room. They had thanked her for surviving. That knowledge did not fade with time. It calcified. In interviews afterward, they struggled to find language that fit. There was no precedent for mourning a child while simultaneously grieving the illusion of another. Sandra had not just taken Mary's life. She had occupied her absence. Detective Lance Carter attended the sentencing quietly, seated in the back of the courtroom. He watched Sandra as the judge read the verdict. Life imprisonment without parole, no mitigation. Sandra did not react. When asked if she had anything to say, she stood slowly. The room stilled. "This was never about hate," she said evenly. "It was about correction." She sat back down before anyone could interrupt. The judge's gavel struck wood. The sound echoed longer than expected. In the months that followed, public interest faded, as it always did. New cases replaced old ones. Headlines moved on. The fundraiser associated with Mary's recovery was dissolved, the remaining money redirected to victim support organizations. The Superstition Mountains returned to travel brochures and hiking blogs, their darker association softened by distance, but some questions refused to settle. Mental health professionals debated whether Sandra represented an extreme outlier or a warning sign overlooked. Commentators asked how often people rehearsed versions of themselves unseen, unchallenged, how identity could be mimicked so thoroughly that even those closest failed to detect the substitution. Carter returned to Route 88 one last time before transferring units. He stood at the roadside where the truck driver had stopped, where headlights had carved a human shape out of darkness. The mountain rose in silhouette, unchanged, indifferent. It had not whispered instructions. It had not demanded sacrifice. It had simply been there. Sandra Wilson entered the state correctional facility quietly. Guards noted her compliance. She followed routines precisely. She asked for reading materials, writing utensils, access to educational programs. She adapted quickly, learning the rhythms of confinement with the same discipline she had applied to imitation. She requested a mirror. When denied, she found others. Metal fixtures, polished surfaces, still water. She spent long periods standing motionless, studying her reflection, adjusting posture, relaxing her shoulders, practicing expressions without speaking. When she did speak, it was often in two tones, one instructive, one responsive. Therapists recorded these behaviors without comment. In one session, a clinician asked Sandra who she believed she was now. Sandra tilted her head slightly, the way Mary used to when considering a question. "I'm finished," she said. "That's who I am at night." Correctional officers reported hearing low conversations from her cell. Sometimes they sounded like arguments, sometimes like rehearsals, sometimes like laughter, always controlled. Outside the prison walls, Mary Wilson's name slowly receded from public memory. Her company continued under new leadership. Her digital presence remained, archived interviews, photographs, articles, unchanging, frozen at the moment before her life was taken. Sandra accessed none of it. She no longer needed reference material. The Superstition Mountains endured. Tourists still hiked the trails. Legends still circulated. Some claimed the land punished greed. Others said it swallowed the unprepared. A few insisted the mountains revealed what people already were. Carter never fully decided which explanation troubled him more, because this case had not been about wilderness or myth or madness. It had been about proximity, about how closely one person could observe another, how patiently they could rehearse, how convincingly they could step into a life already mapped, and how long it took for anyone to notice that something essential was missing. On certain nights, when the desert wind moved just right through the canyons, drivers on Route 88 reported feeling watched, not threatened, just observed, as if something unseen was measuring them, not to take their lives, but to learn them.